The pill tasted wrong, chalky, with a faint sweetness where there should have been a bitter punch. I held the fragments on my tongue, the false taste, screaming a betrayal only I could hear. Sarah stood by the sink, her back to me, humming. She thought I was just a frail old man counting down the days. She was counting them too, just with a different calendar. My deadline was the slow, natural failure of my heart. Hers was the moment it would stop. I washed the paste down with water. Then I reached for my wallet and the list I kept folded inside it. The first name was my lawyer. I had 6 hours before my next scheduled dose and a new prescription to fill. My study was a tomb for old ambitions, the leather chair groaning under my weight. The list on my desk was short, brutal. Assets, accounts, the will. Sarah's name was on every page, a spider sitting in the center of its web. She had power of attorney. She controlled the medications. She had access. I was the asset, slowly being depreciated. My goal was to document the chain of custody for my own pills, from the pharmacy to my mouth. The price was the dull, familiar ache behind my breastbone, a constant reminder of my vulnerability. A shadow crossed the doorway. "Just checking on you, Dad." Her voice was syrup. The pattern interrupt was her presence, a physical manifestation of the threat. The micro-twist, she wasn't just checking. She was counting the pills in the weekly dispenser with her eyes. The cliffhanger. She lingered, her gaze lingering a moment too long on the water glass trembling in my hand. The pharmacy was a monument to fluorescent lighting and quiet desperation. I slid the prescription across the counter. The young pharmacist's eyes flickered with recognition. "Mrs. Ainsley usually picks these up for you." My heart hammered against my ribs. A direct counter move. She had established a pattern, made herself the sole provider. My goal was to break that pattern, to reassert my ownership over my own survival. The price was the risk, the sheer physical effort of this outing, the tremor in my legs. I nodded, my voice a dry rustle. A change of routine. The pattern interrupt was his next question. "She called earlier, said to double-check the dosage, said you'd been confused." He was her resource, unwittingly turned against me. The micro-twist. He was looking at me not as a customer, but as a potential problem. The cliffhanger. He held the bottle, his thumb over the label, hesitating to hand it over. I sat in the car, the new bottle of lisinopril a cold weight in my palm. The old bottle was still in my pocket, the placebo she had given me. The switch had been made. My goal now was reconnaissance. I needed her pills. The price was the gnawing fear that I was already too late, that the damage to my heart was done. I watched the house through the rain-streaked windshield. Her morning ritual was sacrosanct. Coffee, black, in the green ceramic mug. The pressure was her routine itself, a fortress of normalcy. The pattern interrupt was the arrival of the mail truck, a distraction. The micro-twist. Among the bills was a sleek, cream-colored envelope from a private cardiology clinic, addressed to her. The cliffhanger. She retrieved the mail, tapping the envelope against her palm, a thoughtful, almost hungry look on her face. The kitchen at 7 a.m. was a battlefield of steam and the rich smell of coffee. Her vitamins were in a gummy, bear-shaped bottle on the counter. Mine were in the locked dispenser. She moved with an efficient, proprietary air. My goal was simple: get one of her pills. Just one. The price was the performance, the act of feigning weakness, of being the man she thought I was. The pressure was her watchfulness, a hawk pretending to be a dove. The pattern interrupt came when her phone rang, a shrill sound that made her jump. She turned away to answer it. My hand darted out, my fingers closing around the plastic bottle. The micro twist? It was not a child-proof cap. It twisted open with a soft click. The cliffhanger. I heard her footsteps returning, my hand frozen, the open bottle in my grasp. I palmed a single, small white tablet and slipped the bottle back into place. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. The pill in my hand was unmarked, hers. I had my sample. The goal was now analysis. I needed to know what it was. The price was the constant low-grade terror of discovery. Sarah sipped her coffee, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked at me. "You seem tense today, Dad." The pressure was her perception, sharpening. The pattern interrupt was the doorbell, a delivery man with a package. Sarah signed for it, her back to me once more. The micro twist. The return address was the same private cardiology clinic. The cliffhanger, she took the package not to the living room, but downstairs, to the basement, a place she kept locked. The basement door was usually bolted from the other side. Today, it was ajar. A sliver of darkness beckoned. My goal was to see what was in that package. The price was violating the last private space in the house I considered my own. Each step down the wooden stairs was a creaking announcement of my trespass. The air was cold, smelling of dust and concrete. The pressure was the sheer silence from above, the knowledge that she could discover me at any moment. The pattern interrupt was the side of the basement. It wasn't for storage. It was a home gym, a treadmill, weights, a heart rate monitor on a shelf. The micro twist. This was a room dedicated to the preservation of a life, directly below the room where she was trying to end one. The cliffhanger. The opened package lay on the bench. Inside were brochures for long-term cardiac care facilities. The brochures were glossy, filled with pictures of smiling elderly people in beautiful prisons. This was her end game. Not just inheritance, but expedience. She was planning my relocation, my final containment. My goal solidified. It was no longer about proof, it was about consequence. The price was my soul, the part of me that still believed in justice. I climbed back up, my knees protesting. Sarah was in the kitchen washing her mug. The pressure was her physical proximity, the casual way she existed in my space. The pattern interrupt was the taste of my own coffee. Bitter, correct. She had given me my real medication today. A test? Or a temporary reprieve? The micro twist, her own green mug, empty, sat on the counter. The vessel, the cliffhanger. I looked from her mug to the pill in my pocket. The symmetry was perfect and terrible. The white tablet sat on my bedside table. I had called an old contact, a retired pharmacist named Arthur. I claimed it was a pill I found in my late wife's things, that I needed peace of mind. My goal was identification. The price was dragging a friend into my private war. Arthur's voice was scratchy over the phone. "I'll need to run a test. Can you bring it by?" The pressure was time. Sarah would notice a missing pill eventually. The pattern interrupt was the sound of Sarah's car starting outside. She was leaving, an opportunity. The micro twist. I saw her vitamin bottle wasn't on the counter. She had taken it with her. The cliffhanger. I had one shot. This single pill was the only piece of evidence I had, and I had to let it out of my sight. Arthur's apartment smelled of old books and rubbing alcohol. He took the pill with tweezers, holding it up to the light. Unofficial, no imprint. His hands were steady where mine shook. My goal was to get an answer, any answer. The price was the exposure, letting someone else see the crack in my perfectly maintained life. "Give me an hour," he said. The pressure was the ticking clock, each minute a lifetime. The pattern interrupt was my phone buzzing. A text from Sarah. At the gym, back by lunch. The gym, the basement, the heart rate monitor, the micro twist. The lie was so casual, so easily verifiable as false. She was establishing an alibi for her health. The cliffhanger. Arthur returned, his face grim. "It's a Class 1A antiarrhythmic." "Powerful. Why would your wife have this?" The drive home was a blur. A Class 1A antiarrhythmic. In high doses, it could cause the very arrhythmia it was meant to treat. It could stop a heart. She wasn't just taking vitamins. She was treating a condition, or stockpiling a weapon. My goal was to process this. The price was the cold knot of understanding tightening in my gut. She had access to a dangerous drug. She was replacing my safe, maintenance dose beta blockers with placebos. The pressure was the sheer chilling efficiency of it. The pattern interrupt was the sight of Sarah's car in the driveway. She was home early. The micro twist. She was standing on the porch, not going inside, as if waiting for me. The cliffhanger. She smiled, a thin, sharp expression, and raised her hand. In it was my wallet, which I had left on the kitchen counter. "You forgot this, Dad?" I took the wallet from her, my fingers brushed against hers, cold and dry. "Thank you, Sarah." The words felt like ash in my mouth. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She was looking for a reaction, a crack in the facade. My goal was to give her nothing. The price was the effort of the smile I forced onto my own face. The pressure was her scrutiny, a laser scanning for weakness. She followed me inside. The pattern interrupt was the kitchen table. It was cleared. The newspaper was gone. My coffee cup was gone. It was too clean. The micro twist. She had sanitized the space while I was out, erasing traces. The cliffhanger. Her vitamin bottle was back on the counter right next to the sugar canister. The next morning, I watched her make the coffee. The ritual was the same. Boil water, grind beans, the green mug. My goal was execution. The plan was simple, elegant, and monstrous. I had her pill, the antiarrhythmic, in the pocket of my robe. The price was my humanity, the last shred of it. The pressure was the steady, confident sound of her movements. She turned to get the milk from the refrigerator. The pattern interrupt. My own heartbeat, a frantic bird against a cage of bone, loud in my ears. This was the moment. The micro twist. As I moved my hand toward her mug, I saw my reflection in the dark surface of the coffee. I looked calm. The cliffhanger. The pill left my fingers and sank without a trace into the black liquid. She drank it in 3 long gulps, leaning against the counter, checking her phone. She noticed nothing. The deed was done. A quiet transfer of risk. My goal now was observation. Price was the cold sweat soaking the back of my shirt. She placed the empty mug in the sink. "Big plans today, Dad?" The pressure was her normalcy, a weapon in itself. "Just rest," I said. The pattern interrupt was a flicker on her face, a slight wince. Her hand went to her chest, just for a second. Then it was gone. The micro twist. It was working. Faster than I had anticipated. The cliffhanger. She shook her head, as if to clear it, and the motion was unsteady. I retreated to my study. The clock on the wall ticked off the seconds. 10 minutes, 20. My goal was to monitor the situation from a distance. The price was the guilt, a sharp physical pain alongside the one in my chest. I heard a thud from the kitchen, not loud, a body sliding against a cabinet. The pressure was the need to act, to not act, to let the consequences unfold. The pattern interrupt was the sound of ragged breathing. I stood up, my joints screaming. The micro twist. This was no performance. The sound was wet, guttural. The cliffhanger. From the hallway, I saw her on the kitchen floor, one hand clawing at the tile, the other pressed hard over her heart. I called 911. My voice was remarkably steady. I gave the address. My daughter-in-law. She's collapsed. Heart problems. I did not say, I think. I stated it as fact. My goal was to secure the scene. The price was playing the terrified old man, which required no acting. The pressure was the limited time before the paramedics arrived. The pattern interrupt was her gaze. Her eyes were open, wide with panic and a dawning understanding. They locked with mine. She knew. The micro twist. She tried to speak, but only a choked gasp came out. The cliffhanger. Her hand twitched, pointing weakly toward the counter where her pill bottle stood. The paramedics were a blur of green uniforms and efficient chaos. They loaded her onto a gurney. One of them asked about her medical history. I don't know, I said, my voice trembling with a truth they misinterpreted. She's always been so healthy. My goal was to plant the seed. The price was the lie so easily delivered. The pressure was the need to seem helpful, concerned, and useless. The pattern interrupt was a paramedic spotting the pill bottle. He snagged it, dropping it into a plastic bag. We'll have this analyzed. The micro twist. He was treating it as a potential clue, just as I had hoped. The cliffhanger. As they wheeled her out, her head lolled to the side, and her terrified, accusing eyes found mine one last time before the doors closed. The house was silent. Profoundly so. The silence was a physical presence. My goal was to wait. The price was the aftermath, the adrenaline crash that left me shaking in my chair. I looked at the space on the floor where she had fallen. The pressure was the unknown. What would she say when she could speak? The pattern interrupt was the ring of the telephone. The hospital. They needed next of kin information. They asked for her doctor's name. I gave them the name of the private clinic from the envelope. The micro twist, the woman on the phone paused. That's a diagnostic facility, sir. They don't have patients on record. They run tests. The cliffhanger. She had no primary cardiologist. She had been getting tested in secret. I went to the hospital. It was a performance of duty. The waiting room had the stale smell of antiseptic and fear. A doctor in blue scrubs approached me. He looked tired. She's stable. We've corrected the arrhythmia. It was severe. My goal was to gather intelligence. The price was facing the reality of what I had done. What caused it? I asked. The pressure was the doctor's clinical gaze, assessing me as part of the patient's environment. He shook his head. We don't know. It's unusual in someone her age. We're running toxicology on the contents of that vitamin bottle. The pattern interrupt was his use of the word toxicology. It was no longer a medical inquiry. It was an investigation. The micro twist. He was looking at me, waiting for a reaction. The cliffhanger. The initial scan shows the pills aren't vitamins, he said. We need to know what she's been taking. I was allowed to see her for 5 minutes. She was in a private room, wires snaking from under her gown to beeping machines. The goal was to control the narrative. The price was the sight of her, pale and small, in the stark white bed. Her eyes were closed. The pressure was the hum of the machinery, a soundtrack of her vulnerability. I stood by the bed. The pattern interrupt was her hand. It lay on the blanket, and taped to the back of it was a hospital bracelet. It made it all real. The micro twist. Her eyes fluttered open. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, clear hatred. She had no proof, but she had certainty. The cliffhanger. Her lips parted. She had a voice now, and she used it. You. Her single word hung in the sterile air. You. It was an accusation, a verdict, and a declaration of war. My goal was to neutralize it. The price was the icy calm I had to project. I leaned closer, adjusting her blanket, a gesture for the nurses watching through the glass. My voice was a low whisper, just for her. You should rest, Sarah. The doctors are very concerned about what they found in your vitamins. The pressure was her gaze, trying to bore into my soul. The pattern interrupt was the machine beside her bed, which let out a sharp, high-pitched beep as her heart rate spiked. The micro twist. The hatred in her eyes flickered, replaced by a sliver of primal fear. She understood the trap. The cliffhanger. A nurse rushed in, focusing on the machine, forcing me to step back into the role of the worried elder. I drove home through a gray drizzle. The world outside the car was blurred, indistinct. My goal was to secure my position. The price was the methodical erasure of any evidence linking me to her pill. The pressure was time. The hospital's toxicology report was a ticking clock. I went straight to the basement. The home gym was a monument to her deceit. The pattern interrupt was the heart rate monitor. It was still on, displaying an error message. I unplugged it. The micro twist, tucked behind it, was a small leather-bound journal. Not hers, my son's. The cliffhanger. I opened it. The first page was dated a week before his fatal car accident. I took the journal to my study. My hands were steady now. The goal was to understand. The price was reopening a wound I had thought scarred over. The journal was not a diary. It was a log. Numbers, account codes, transfers. My son had been methodical. The pressure was the dawning realization that his death was not the end of something, but a pivot point. The pattern interrupt was an entry from 3 days before he died. S, pushing for the power of attorney again, says it's for Dad's own good. I told her no, always no. The micro twist. My son had been a barrier between her and me. His death was not just a tragedy, it was an opportunity she had seized. The cliffhanger. The final entry was a single, scrawled line. Confronting S about the withdrawals. She's nervous. The pieces locked into place with a terrible final click. She had been stealing from him. He found out. He died. Then she moved on to me. A 2-stage plan. My goal shifted from survival to retribution. The price was the corrosive anger now burning in my chest, hotter than any heart pain. The pressure was the journal in my hands, a radioactive truth. I couldn't give it to the police, not yet. It was my leverage. The pattern interrupt was the doorbell. Through the window, I saw a rental car. A man in a trench coat stood on the porch. The micro twist. He held a badge case up to the camera. Private investigator. The cliffhanger. He was here for me. I opened the door. The investigator was in his 40s with a tired, competent face. Mr. Ainsley, I'm Robert Daly. I've been retained by Mrs. Sarah Ainsley. The goal was damage control. The price was the immediate calculated shift into confusion. Retained? But she's in the hospital. The pressure was his neutral gaze, taking in every detail of my face, my posture. She initiated the contract last week, sir, concerning the safeguarding of her assets. The pattern interrupted. He wasn't here about the pills. He was here about her money. She was protecting her future inheritance from me. The micro twist. Her move was both brilliant and paranoid, using her own guilt as a blueprint for my actions. The cliffhanger. She provided some documents for the safe, he said. I need to verify their location. I led him to the study, my mind racing. Her assets, the money she had taken from my son. The goal was to play the ignorant old man. The price was allowing this stranger to root through my home. She has a safe? I asked, my voice frail. Daly nodded. She gave me the combination. He knelt by a floor vent I had never given a second thought to. His fingers found a hidden latch. The pressure was the smooth, professional efficiency of his search. The pattern interrupt was the sound of the small fireproof box sliding out from its hiding place. The micro twist. She had a secret life within my own house, a life of stolen funds and contingency plans. The cliffhanger. He opened the box. It was not full of money. It contained a single, sealed USB drive and a small key. Daly looked at the contents, then at me. His expression was unreadable. This matches her inventory. He took the USB drive and the key. My goal was to learn what was on that drive without revealing my interest. The price was the frustration of letting him walk away with it. What is it? I asked. Her words were insurance, he said flatly. The pressure was the term. Insurance against what? Me? The pattern interrupt was my phone buzzing. The hospital. The doctor. I had to take the call. The micro twist. The doctor's voice was different, more formal. Mr. Ainsley, we've identified the drug in your daughter-in-law's system. We need to speak with you in person. The cliffhanger. As I ended the call, I saw Daly watching me, his eyes noting the tension in my shoulders. Daly left with the insurance. I was alone with a new, more dangerous deadline. The hospital knew about the drug. My goal was to preempt their suspicion. The price was walking back into the lion's den voluntarily. I drove to the hospital, the journal a heavy weight in my inner pocket. The pressure was the impending confrontation. The pattern interrupt was the sight of a police officer standing near the nurse's station on Sarah's floor. He wasn't there for her. He was talking to a nurse who gestured down the hall. The micro twist. They were looking into the theft of controlled substances from the hospital's pharmacy. A separate issue. But it thickened the air of suspicion. The cliffhanger. The doctor saw me and broke away from the conversation, his face grim. He led me into a small, windowless consultation room. The goal was to control the narrative. The price was the performance of a lifetime. The substance was flecainide, the doctor said, a potent antiarrhythmic. It's not prescribed lightly. I let my hands shake on the table. I don't understand. She said they were vitamins. The pressure was his clinical detachment. How did she get them? I shook my head, a perfect picture of bewildered grief. The pattern interrupt was my own heart. A genuine, painful throb made me wince. The doctor's eyes dropped to the nitroglycerin spray I placed on the table. The micro twist. His focus shifted from accuser to physician. You're unwell, Mr. Ainsley? The cliffhanger. This is a very stressful situation, he said, for everyone, but we are legally obligated to report this to the authorities. The police. It was inevitable, but now it was real. My goal was to survive the first contact. The price was inviting the law into my home. I returned home to wait. The pressure was the silence. The pattern interrupt was the landline ringing. It was my lawyer, Martin. Edward, I just received a concerning email from a private investigator named Daly. He says Sarah hired him to secure assets, citing concerns about your mental competence. The pressure from Sarah was multidimensional. She was attacking from her hospital bed. The micro twist. Martin's tone was sharp, professional. This is a serious preemptive strike, Edward. We need to meet. First thing tomorrow. The cliffhanger. As I hung up, headlights swept across the living room window. A sedan with official markings pulled into my driveway. 2 detectives, a man and a woman. Detective Miller, the senior, had a calm, weary demeanor. His partner, Reyes, observed everything. They sat in my living room. My goal was to appear cooperative and vulnerable. The price was the mental energy required to navigate their layered questions. Miller explained the hospital's report. Flecainide. Do you know what that is, Mr. Ainsley? I shook my head. She told me they were vitamins for her energy. The pressure was Reyes's silent scrutiny of the room, my posture, my hands. The pattern interrupt was my genuine need for my nitroglycerin spray. I used it. The micro twist, the medical action created a pause, a shift in the room's dynamic. I was no longer just a subject of inquiry. I was a frail, sick man. The cliffhanger. Miller's eyes fell on a framed photo of my son on the mantelpiece. Your son passed recently, correct? He asked, his tone softening with manufactured sympathy. The detectives left after 30 minutes. They had no grounds for anything more. Yet, my goal was to understand the key Daly took. The price was the exhaustion that felt like a weight on my bones. I went to the basement, to the gym. The key was small, brass. It looked like a storage unit key. The pressure was the unknown contents of that unit. The pattern interrupt was my phone. A notification from my home security system. A motion alert in the backyard. I checked the live feed. A fox. But the timing sent a jolt through me. The micro twist. The alert was a reminder of my visibility. I was being watched, if not by people, then by systems I myself had installed. The cliffhanger. I found a crumpled receipt in the gym wastebasket. It was for a monthly rental at A-plus storage. Unit blah 114. The date was from 2 days ago. The meeting with Martin, my lawyer, was in his oak-paneled office. He steepled his fingers. Sarah's move is aggressive, a competency challenge. It would freeze your assets, give her control. My goal was to go on the offensive. The price was revealing the depth of her treachery. I slid my son's journal across the desk. She was stealing from him. He was going to confront her. Martin read in silence. The pressure was the quiet tick of the clock on his wall. The pattern interrupt was his sharp intake of breath. This changes everything. The micro twist. He looked up, not at me, but at the journal. This isn't just about money. It's about motive for your son's accident. The cliffhanger. He closed the journal. We need to find that storage unit before she does. A-plus storage was a complex of orange garage doors under a highway overpass. Unit 114 was in a corner. The goal was entry. The price was the blatant risk of breaking in. I had the key Daly had taken, but it was in his possession. The pressure was the security camera mounted on a pole, its red light glowing. The pattern interrupt was a landscaping truck that pulled in, its engine loud, blocking the camera's view of my car for a moment. The micro twist. I saw the lock on unit bar 114 was a simple padlock. I had a set of old keys in my glove compartment. One, from a long-forgotten shed, was similar. The cliffhanger. I slipped the key into the padlock. It turned with a solid metallic click. The metal door rolled up with a deafening rumble. The unit was small, empty, except for a single cardboard box. The goal was to see what she deemed insurance. The price was the dust and the smell of damp concrete. The pressure was the sound of another car entering the facility. I pulled the box into my trunk and drove away. The pattern interrupt was the weight of the box. It was heavy, dense, not with paper. At home, I opened it. The micro twist. It wasn't full of documents. It was packed with neatly bundled cash and a single sealed manila envelope. The cliffhanger. I sliced the envelope open. Inside were photos of me, entering the pharmacy, talking to Arthur. They were dated from the last week. She had been having me followed. The photos were a timeline of my counteroffensive. The cash was a fortune, at least $200,000. My son's money. The goal was to process this new reality. The price was the violation of my privacy, so thoroughly documented. The pressure was the clock. Daly would soon know the unit was breached. The pattern interrupt was a slip of paper at the bottom of the box. A sticky note with a phone number and a name. Voss. The micro twist. The handwriting was not Sarah's. It was my son's. The cliffhanger. My home phone rang. I let it go to the machine. A man's voice, smooth and cold. "Mr. Ainsley, this is Mr. Voss. We need to talk about the property you've removed." Voss. The name from the note. He knew. The goal was to secure the evidence. The price was the realization that this went far beyond Sarah. I loaded the box into my car trunk again. I couldn't keep it here. The pressure was Voss's unknown reach. The pattern interrupt was the arrival of another car, Detective Miller's sedan. He got out alone. His expression was neutral. "Mr. Ainsley, we need to follow up on a few points." The micro twist. He wasn't here about the storage unit. He was holding my son's journal. "We received an anonymous tip to look into your son's financials. This journal was mentioned. Can you explain how you have it?" The cliffhanger. Sarah had played her next card. She was pointing them at me. I stood on my porch, the journal in Miller's hand between us. My goal was to create plausible deniability. The price was lined to a detective's face. "I found it recently, in the basement, with her things. I didn't understand what it was. I feigned confusion, fear." Miller watched me, his eyes like chips of flint. The pressure was his silence, waiting for me to crack. The pattern interrupt was the sound of my car's engine. I had left it running, a stupid, nervous mistake. Miller's eyes flicked to the car, the micro twist. His gaze lingered on the trunk, where the box of cash was hidden. "Long trip?" he asked mildly. The cliffhanger. He didn't wait for an answer, turning the journal over in his hands. "It's empty, Mr. Ainsley. Every page is blank." The world tilted. Blank. She had swapped it. The real journal was gone. This was a plant, a setup to make me look paranoid, accusatory. My goal was to not vomit on my own doorstep. The price was the complete dismantling of my credibility. I don't understand," I whispered, and this time it was real. Miller's phone buzzed. He listened, his eyes never leaving me. "That was the hospital. Your daughter-in-law is awake, and she's ready to make a full statement." The pressure was now a vice. The pattern interrupt was the sight of a dark, unmarked van slowing down as it passed my house. The micro twist, I recognized the man in the passenger seat. Daly, the investigator. The cliffhanger. Miller followed my gaze, his expression unreadable. "It might be best if you come down to the station with me, Edward, to clear things up." I was in the interrogation room. It was small, beige, and smelled of stale coffee. Miller sat across from me. Reyes leaned against the wall. The goal was to say nothing. The price was the crushing fatigue and the ache in my chest. I asked for my lawyer. They had to wait. The pressure was the recording device, the red light blinking on the wall. The pattern interrupt was Miller sliding a photograph across the table. It was a picture of Arthur's pharmacy. "We know you went here the day before your daughter-in-law fell ill. You obtained a specific prescription." The micro twist. They had connected the timeline, but they were missing the core truth. The cliffhanger. The door opened. A uniformed officer leaned in. "Sir, we've got a problem. There's a fire at Mr. Ainsley's house." The fire changed everything. Miller's questioning stopped. The station became a blur of movement. They drove me back. The goal was to see the damage. The price was the numbness that settled over me, a shield against the reality. My house was a blackened shell, smoke still curling into the dawn sky. The fire crews were packing their hoses. The pressure was the total loss. Everything was gone. The pattern interrupt was the fire chief approaching Miller. Point of origin was the basement. Accelerant used, definitely arson. The micro twist, he wasn't looking at me, he was looking past me at the neighbors. The cliffhanger, the chief added, "We found a broken window latch. Entry was forced. This wasn't an inside job." I stood on the sidewalk, the heat from the ruins warming my face. Arson. Forced entry. The goal was to process this. The price was the complete obliteration of my past, my present, my son's photos, my wife's letters, all ash. The pressure was the new, terrifying variable. Someone else was involved. Voss? The pattern interrupt was the feel of the car keys in my pocket, the trunk, the box. The evidence was still safe. The micro twist. The fire was not a punishment. It was a cleanup. Someone was erasing the trail, and my house was part of it. The cliffhanger. Miller came back, his phone to his ear. He looked at me, his expression grim. "Your daughter-in-law has been discharged from the hospital against medical advice. She's gone. Sarah was in the wind. The money was in my trunk. I had no home. My goal was to find a safe haven. The price was accepting that I was now a fugitive in my own life. Miller offered a hotel voucher. I refused. I needed to be mobile. The pressure was the unknown location of Sarah and this Voss. The pattern interrupt was my phone dying. The last of my charge faded, cutting me off from my contacts, my maps. The micro twist. The isolation was complete. I was alone with the cash and the photos in a parked car, watching the smoldering remains of my life. The cliffhanger. I opened the glove box. Inside, tucked behind the manual, was the real journal. I had moved it days ago, a forgotten instinct. It had survived. I checked into a motel 20 miles away. The room smelled of bleach and mildew. The goal was to regroup. The price was the profound disorientation of having nothing but a box of stolen money and a dead son's secrets. I laid the journal and the photos on the scratchy bedspread. The pressure was the need to understand the connection between Sarah and Voss. The pattern interrupt was a knock on the door, not a hard police knock. A tentative tap. The micro twist. I peered through the peephole. It was Arthur, the pharmacist. He looked terrified. The cliffhanger. He held up a small evidence bag. Inside was a single chalky white pill. "She came to see me," he whispered through the door. I let Arthur in. He was shaking. "She showed up at my home an hour ago. She offered me money." He placed the evidence bag on the table. The goal was to get information. The price was dragging an old friend deeper into this. "For what?" I asked. "For a statement? Saying you pressured me to identify that pill, that you were obsessed, unstable." The pressure was Sarah's relentless counterattack. The pattern interrupt was Arthur's next words. "She wasn't alone. There was a man with her. Cold eyes. He didn't speak." Voss. The micro-twist. Arthur pushed the bag toward me. "This is the placebo, the one you gave me. I analyzed it. It's not just sugar. It has a binder. I can trace the manufacturer." The cliffhanger. He gave me a name printed on a slip of paper. "This is the supplier. It's a specialized firm." After Arthur left, I looked at the name. Nutrapharm Compounding. The goal was a new direction. The price was using the tainted money to fund my search. I paid for a week in the motel with cash. The pressure was the knowledge that Sarah and Voss were a step ahead, reshaping the narrative.